Screwtape2020, a piece not only inspired but blatantly copied from C.S. Lewis's classic The Screwtape Letters. My dear Wormwood, I couldn't help but notice your celebrations over the current epidemic. After the abysmal failure with your first patient in the previous century, I'd expect perhaps a bit more cautious pessimism from you. Frankly, I didn't think you deserved another chance. Lucky for you, there are many at low command who predict the war may be nearing its end, and we need every available tempter working overtime. While many of the humans are scurrying about trying to supply themselves with certain foodstuffs and paper products, we need to be about the business of hoarding souls. Let me begin with some larger scale items before moving on to the particulars of your own patient. Of course, all of us down here are ecstatic over the shuttering of the churches. To see the shepherds withholding essential nourishment from their own flock is indeed a delightful thing to behold. The foot soldiers of the enemy being cut off from their vital lines of supply. This is, I admit, a feat that we ourselves could not have achieved. We do not know whether this decision of the shepherds was made out of prudence or cowardice. In the light of recent history, we'd like to believe it's the latter, but our intelligence has not been able to ascertain for sure. While it's true that the suspension of their sacraments will at least temporarily render the patients weaker, there is also an inherent danger to us. With the deprivation of the food that only the enemy can provide, the humans may become more acutely aware of their hunger and need for that eternal sustenance. One of their ancient Roman poets penned a phrase about the way in which absence makes the heart grow fonder. A sentimental cliché, perhaps, but it seems to hold some water. The absence of the enemy, at least in the form of his true presence, may prompt the minds of patients across the globe to seek him in other ways, and this is the point at which we must intervene. We see that many of the humans, even while experiencing confusion and anxiety, are nevertheless finding some measure of solace in their state of retreat. Though faced with circumstances quite strange to them, many now find themselves, at least in some respects, settling into routines that are actually more natural. Mothers at home with their young children, fathers with more time to devote to domestic duties, siblings bonding and helping one another. All of this threatens to undermine the decades of progress we have made towards the dissolution of the family dynamic the enemy intended. A dynamic that reflects his own unity of being. A part of what he meant when he said, "Let us create them in our own image." As for your own patient, I see that he has been using some of this unexpected gift of time to bolster communications with the enemy. Had you even taken notice? Or were you too intoxicated with delight over exponentially increasing numbers of infections and deaths? Remember, while we might take some pleasure in their sufferings and death, these things are but inevitable realities. For us, it is only the state of their immortal souls that matters. Death in and of itself does us absolutely no good. The enemy saw to that on a Sunday long ago, a day they will soon commemorate, shuttered churches or no. I also took notice that you permitted your patient some genuine pleasures this week. The book that was collecting dust on his nightstand, the one he had been meaning to read for months. He picked it up one afternoon and read it. What's worse, he really enjoyed it. As he was reading, he couldn't help but recollect the joy he experienced as a child, the joy that comes from the unlocking of the imagination by a good story. That's just the sort of thing that places him safely in the enemy's camp. As if the book itself weren't bad enough, there was something within its pages that inspired your patient to go for an outdoor excursion he'd been contemplating for some time. The afternoon spent in nature ended up being refreshing for both his body and his soul. Where were you the entire time? That same book also led him to the discovery of a piece of art which he found delightful to gaze upon. 3 healthy pleasures, all within the space of a few days. You should be turned into fodder for more deserving tempters. But not all is lost. After all, your patient is a creature of habit and prone to dabbling in this or that. Get him to regard these recent uses of his time merely as a phase. Tell him it's really only a matter of time before he must return to real life. And make sure he includes under the heading of real life such things as staying informed. The next time he reaches for a book, be sure he notices the television remote control lying beside it. Suggest to him that watching considerable amounts of the news is part of what it means to be a responsible citizen. The television has been one of our greatest tools. The staff in our technology department should receive commendations for their efforts to support the humans in growing this thing from a little box with black and white images to the oversized panel that overtakes their living spaces. Useful as well is the social media of their current age. The next time your patient gets it in his mind to pray or read or whatnot, remind him that it's been at least half an hour since he sat before the Book of Faces. Encourage him in the belief that if he just spends enough time scrolling through the endless parade of meaningless memes, eventually he will stumble upon one that offers enlightenment. It really is great fun watching as they run their fingers across those little screens, like some domesticated rodent in a wheel. They think they coined the term social distancing, when in fact we've been applying that principle on them through technology for decades. You might wish to try suggesting to your patient that maybe the sacraments aren't so necessary after all. When he experiences hunger for the enemy's bread, or spiritual festering due to a prolonged period without absolution, convince him that these sensations must be the result of the new reality in which the humans now find themselves. Dangle before him the possibility that perhaps the sacraments really are mere symbols of something greater and more abstract. You might lead him toward the modern camp of, I don't need the church, I can just pray from the comfort of my garden, or I don't need a middleman to absolve my sins, I can just go directly to the source. The contagion of these beliefs has been far more valuable to us over the course of history than any virus could be. Admittedly, your patient may be too far gone for this particular line of attack, but you can always work on his frustration with the church hierarchy. Never miss an opportunity to scatter seeds of doubt and division whenever you can. You never know what thorns might spring up amongst the flowers. Above all, remember this, dear nephew. Like any war or natural disaster, this epidemic is, at least for us, quite a neutral affair. Some of the humans view it as a horror, yet others regard it as a hoax. Our intelligence agents do not know which it is, but frankly, it doesn't really matter. As in all situations, everything depends on how we can manipulate it. The humans in certain professions, doctors, nurses, civil servants and such, may have some advantage as their vocations inherently demand self-sacrifice for the good of others. Despite claims that he loves them all, the enemy certainly exhibits signs of favoritism as far as I'm concerned. But your patient is not on the front lines of this thing, so he's not yet a lost cause. Play upon his fears with regards to the future and bodily preservation, as well as his regrets and fixation on the sins of his past. Doing so will help prevent him from living fully in the present, which is where the enemy desires him to be. Also, do all you can to get him to direct his thoughts inward. So many of the humans are convinced that the key to their own happiness lies in finding themselves. Many of them never grasp that insidious paradox of the enemy, that the realization of their true selves is bound to a willingness to sacrifice for the good of another. Though the enemy demonstrated this in the starkest way imaginable, many of them remain blind to the reality. Our job is to keep it that way. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.